are far worse things waiting man than death.
You will be scared shitless.
Hey, hey, hey.
Hey.
So, Day of the Dead. I'm going to assume you have already seen Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead.
Yes, I have.
And Day of the Dead. Now, was this your virgin viewing or had you seen it before?
I'd seen it before, but quite a while ago, so it was good to refresh.
Okay, fantastic. And one of the things that I like to do on the show is rate a movie, not just based on its genre, but also based on horror movies in general, and then also movies in general. And
Yeah.
so obviously Day of the Dead is a zombie movie. That's its subgenre. So in the zombie films, with the lowest possible being a 0.01, which I would say I have seen some zombie movies that would
Oh,
fit
yeah,
that
definitely.
category. Zombie
Definitely.
4 would probably be among those. Maybe The Video Dead, something like that.
Yeah.
And then number one with the greatest zombie movie of all time being whatever, how would you
Mm.
rank Day of the Dead?
I would put it kind of in the middle for me. Just
Okay.
right in the middle.
Okay, so as far as zombie movies go, this is top tier for me. And a lot
Yeah.
of it has to do with nostalgia. Which again, I'm pushing 50. Day of the Dead came out in 1985, so I would have been 11 years old. I would have been there when it debuted on cable. I would have been there when it debuted on, VHS,
Yeah.
and when it came out into the theater. There was not a lot of hype around this movie. There were a lot of other films. Zombie films had kind of not been as popular when this one came out, although another movie that came out around the same time that a lot of people like even better was Return of the Living Dead. Have you seen that
Yeah.
one?
Yeah.
Okay, which is a very different kind of zombie movie, but it's
Mm.
it's the one that I would say it's more important than Day of the Dead, but I don't like it quite as much as I like Day of the Dead. So the reason I say it's more important is because Return of the Living Dead is the one that the zombies said brains.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when you say zombie, a lot of people, that's what they think is, a zombie saying
Exactly.
brains. So that's interesting that you would kind of place it at the middle of the pack. But I would say it's top tier for me, probably in the top 4 or 5.
Yeah.
But zombie movies aren't my favorite genre either, though.
Me
So
neither. Me neither. But I am with a very avid zombie movie fan, so
yeah.
I am forced to watch a lot of them.
So horror movies in general, I would place it closer to the middle of the pack for sure.
Yeah.
Zombie movies closer to the top, and then cinema movies in general, I would give it probably a 4.5 out of 10, if that, just because a lot of the acting is very hammy.
Yeah.
The pacing can get a little bit talky at times. So,
Yeah. It's a
all
very
right.
human-based zombie film. It's very human.
Now, obviously, this is the third one in the series, so it's a little bit goofy that I wanted to start with this one. But the reason I did is because it's still my favorite Romero zombie movie. So I've seen Night of the Living Dead 1,000 times. I'm sure you've seen it
Yeah.
tons of times. It's the most famous zombie movie of all time, most likely. Night of the Living Dead, is pretty much what defined zombies,
Yeah.
modern zombies, human being that comes back from the dead to eat other humans, to eat human beings. And thank Romero for that. The original Night of the Living Dead, yes, it was a game changer, defined the genre. But as far as sitting down and enjoying a movie, I would rather watch Dawn of the Dead, which was the second one, probably
Yeah.
more than Night of the Living Dead, and probably just about as much as Day of the Dead. So have you seen Dawn of the Dead, where they go to the shopping mall and
Yeah, that's my favorite out of the trilogy.
yes.
That's I could rewatch it all the time. It's a classic.
Yes. It truly is. And one of the things that I love about Romero is he was always so progressive in his casting decisions. Obviously, in Night of the Living Dead, he had a very strong African American lead. Of course, the tragic ending was so awful when
Yeah.
they shoot him. But then he had Peter in Dawn of the Dead, who was the hero in that. And then in this one, he had a woman as the
Yes.
main character. So I thought that is just classic Romero, pushing the
Mm.
envelope.
Ahead of the
Um,
times.
yeah, I mean, it was a year before Sigourney Weaver came out and blew everybody away with Aliens, even. So there were even fewer female leads at that time. And he was like, nah, why not? Why not have a strong female lead?
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to take a step back because I've seen this movie 1,000 times and just give me let's start at the beginning. So just your general thoughts on Day of the Dead.
Um, I enjoy it as a human-based story film. Like it's very bleak, it's very raw, it's very depressing, the reality of what society would end up becoming if it were true. And I think is Romero's one of his most really dark zombie films, not in the gory way, in the way of like, oh God, the humans are against each other. And mentioning the female lead, it's her position is quite terrifying at times. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the perspective that he takes. I really enjoy Bub. It's like
Babe.
he's such like a puppy, and it's just nice. And if you think zombies are not dangerous, why not just give them a gun and
Right.
just make them even worse?
Say hello to your Aunt Alicia, bub. Hello, Aunt Alicia. It was so nice.
Yeah.
I agree, though. It is definitely the most bleak of the Romero zombie films. It's also the most claustrophobic. It takes place
Oh,
in like
100%.
almost completely underground. You don't get to go up to the
Yeah.
surface too much. I do love that when they do get back from the first initial sweep to find survivors, that the first thing you see is a weed plant. They're growing marijuana out there. It's like, yeah, of course they
Yeah.
would in the
That,
apocalypse. Why not?
yeah.
A little 420 action, but that was Greg Nicotero growing that. And it's interesting that you brought up the bleakness of it because I think out of all of the zombie movies ever, this is the one that influenced The Walking Dead more than any
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
rest of them because of Nicotero's involvement. He was a protege of Tom Savini. This movie features probably Tom Savini's best zombie work.
Yeah.
And yeah, he has a scene later in the film where it's just his head, like with these probes sticking in it, and you see his
Yeah.
mouth moving, and it's so creepy. And
And you see it again in The Walking Dead. He's known for doing it in that as well,
yes,
which is
yes,
iconic. And they originally wanted Romero to hop on to The Walking Dead, but he said that it wasn't his kind of zombies. It was the modern day kind of looking at them.
yeah, yeah. And so, looking back at the way things were in '85, I think the nuclear threat, probably more than anything, was hovering over everybody. And I think Romero and his team got this feeling that we were all going to screw ourselves. We were going to blow
Yeah.
everything to shit and just end up, if we were lucky, having to start all over. And so that's kind of
Yeah.
the main theme of Day of the Dead was if we don't get it together, man, we're going to just completely destroy ourselves. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely the darkest, most bleak of the bunch. So let's start chronologically. We start with, of course, the opening segment and I'm gonna go ahead and spoil my scared shitless. This soundtrack scares the shit out of me. Like the
It's
whole,
so good.
it's like
It
just
really makes you jump.
dark and like just even the little
Yeah.
it's very, I don't know, it's very 80s horror.
Yeah,
It's the
definitely.
best way for me to describe it. So you get that nice opening sequence where Laurie Cardille is surrounded by the bleakness of it all. She's by
Yeah.
herself. She's in this empty room with a single calendar with X's on it, and here
Yeah.
comes October 31st, of course, the darkest day the world has ever known. And the zombie hands come out, and it was just so effective of an opening. It's slightly cheesy if you look at it from a
Yeah.
modern perspective, but at that time period, that would have scared the crap out of just about anybody. So,
I mean, it's so unexpected for the first time watching it. You really don't expect that.
and then we go right into them looking for survivors. You have that beautiful moment where you get to see the first zombie, the first full
Yeah.
zombie. And that was one of Savini's masterpieces. It was a puppet called Dr. Tongue. So named because his whole bottom of his face was missing, and you just see his big tongue sticking out. You of course see the newspaper flashes by the dead walk.
The Dead Walk. Oh, iconic.
The city itself, that was another kind of Walking Dead thing that you get where the cities are going to be a place you do not want to be in the apocalypse if the
Yeah.
zombie apocalypse happens, or really any apocalypse. People are going to be scrambling to survive, and in the end, it's not going to go well. So
Yeah.
the iconography, the imagery of the alligator coming out
I
of the
know.
bank, it's like,
I forgot
wow.
about that. And then I saw it and I was like, you can really tell this was filmed in Florida.
Right. Like, what else are you gonna have, coming out of a bank in a zombie apocalypse? So we've got that great scene where Terry Alexander is the African American gentleman who is not from Jamaica, but putting on quite the convincing Jamaican accent, don't you know? And
The
he's talking about,
strongest one I've ever heard.
yeah, listen, you can hear it over the engines.
Yeah.
He might have put it on a little bit heavy, but
A little bit strong.
yeah, it's all right. We still love him. He's quite kind to the fans at conventions, and in fact, Lori Cardeal, Jarlath Conroy, who plays the other pilot,
Yeah.
or the guy who drinks and he does the radio equipment. And then we've got Miguel, poor Miguel. He's just,
He's
I
having a rough
probably,
time.
he really is. And that probably would be me in the zombie
Oh, yeah.
apocalypse. I'm not gonna lie. I would just be a mess.
Nervous
I'd be the one
breakdown.
who gets the sedative.
Oh, 100%.
So they go back. We find out that things are not going well on the survivor front. And then we're back at the compound and we get to meet Steele and Rickles. What are your thoughts on Steele and Rickles?
Um,
Steele's the
Instantly,
great big guy, and Rickles is like the little kind of annoying toady guy.
instantly did not like them,
Yeah.
which tests well to the actors because they make them so unlikable, especially Steele. And he's just, as a woman, he makes my skin crawl. And it's,
Yeah.
I guess it's really good scripting. It really does
Yeah,
make you hate those characters.
he didn't have to put on too much of an effect for that script writing, man. I mean, biggest piece of meat in the cave, it's like
Yeah. And it's
really
instant.
good.
It's like straight away you're just met with it and you're like, oh, these are very horrible people.
But I love the fact that she stands up to them,
Oh,
she's like, you
100%.
are incapable of interesting me except as an anthropological curiosity. What a great line.
Yeah.
I still use that line to this day,
Such
whenever
a
I get the
strong
chance.
female.
Yeah.
Strong female lead. It's what we want to see.
We do see that she's in much better shape than Miguel, and of course they don't listen to her and call him up there
Mm.
anyway. He almost gets Rickles killed. She ends up having to sedate him. And then we're going to meet Captain Rhodes for the first time.
Yes.
He is what we call a show stealer for all the wrong reasons.
100%. He really just captivates the whole
Yeah.
screen, and you really hate him, but you love when he's on the screen.
Yeah, he's just dripping with vitriol and sleaze and just every
Yes.
characteristic you can have for a human male that you just Like, dude, man, what happened? Who the hell raised you?
Who left him in charge?
Right.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, exactly. Who put him in charge? And that's the worst part about it is that, in a situation like this where you've got survivors scrambling to just pick up the pieces of
Yeah,
humanity and figure out what to do next, this is who we have in charge,
this
you
is what we
know?
got.
And it kind of reminds me a little bit of today. It's like
Yeah.
here we are trying to pick up the pieces from COVID and all these
And this is
horrible
what we
things,
got.
and this is what we've got. So with everything going on in the world, yes, I could definitely go off to a big island somewhere and make some babies or get
Which
some
is
babies, as he says.
wildest ending.
Fantastic ending, and I'm glad that he finally did a very happy ending for one of his zombie movies because
Yeah.
the first one was a very bleak, sad, horrible ending. Dawn of the Dead was kind of a mixed bag where the flyboy dies at the end and turns into a zombie, and that's very sad. Roger
Mhm.
dies. Peter survives, Franny survives, but who knows what they're going to be facing when they get out there into the real world. But then,
Mhm.
Day of the Dead, you've got that beautiful island with the
Yeah.
ferns and the sand, the beach, and it's just like the great tropical soundtrack there at the end. It's a little bit hokey. But it's like they earned it, after
Yeah.
everything they've been through.
Rooting for them.
So back to the what's going on with Rhodes and Steele, and we've got Dr. Frankenstein, who they call Richard Liberty, who plays the doctor who is training Bub and apparently the other zombies. This guy, I don't know. I mean, I've got very mixed feelings about him. I thought he
Yeah.
was quite the overactor.
Oh, 100%.
But
He
at the
was in a
same
different
time,
film.
yeah, but at the same time, everybody's kind of a little bit overacting in this.
Mm.
It's kind of what puts it more towards the middle of the pack in terms of horror films.
Yeah.
But one of the things that makes it more towards the top end of zombie movies for me is the fact that there's so much blood and guts and
Oh.
gore. And he really has the best scenes with all the gore and the stuff like plopping out onto the
Oh, yeah.
floor, sticking you know, the brain saws into the zombies left and right. And she had just got done telling him, "You have got to stop destroying these specimens. It's getting harder and harder to go up top and get more." And what does he do? As soon as one of them breaks his restraint, he sticks it right in the head with a bone
Yep.
saw. So it's like, you're not really listening, are you, dude?
No, he's in his own little world doing his own thing, like in a completely different film, almost in like a comedy. I want to say his character is
Yeah, he
so
was some
over.
comic relief. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, turning up to dinner literally covered in blood, head to toe, and it's just he's like you said, most of the gore and the blood and guts come from his character, so you kind of like seeing him on screen for that.
right. Who do we also have John Amplas, who had a very minor role. He was
Mm.
one of my least favorite roles, but he's famous for doing other
Yeah.
Romero films. He also plays in Creepshow. He plays in Martin, which was
Yes.
Romero's vampire-esque movie, I should say. So I've enjoyed him in everything else but Day of the Dead. And Day of
It's
the
pretty
Dead is,
forgettable.
yeah, Day of the Dead is one of my favorite Romero movies, but John Amplas's role was he was completely wasted in this. So,
100%.
um, and then we've got all the other minor characters that are pretty much disposable.
Yeah.
Um, we've got the kind of fighting back and forth between the soldiers and the scientists, and then we've got the zombies themselves. Um, so moving right along to the scared shit list.
You will be scared shitless.
I'm going to go ahead and reiterate that the soundtrack of this movie, and just for anybody who is not familiar with the show, if this is your first time tuning in, the scared shit list is the moment during the show during which we talk about the things that we found actually scary
Yeah.
things that either scared us or which we find, scary in general. And number one for me has got to be the soundtrack. Number two is the gore. Oh my God.
Oh.
Like I had never seen such, and it was real guts. I found this out
Oh
much
yeah,
later.
yeah.
They not only were they real guts, they were rancid guts. And so,
Rotten.
yes, these poor actors were covered in rancid guts. Talk about like
Oh.
capital realism, just
Oh. And
so
especially poor Captain Rhodes, whose death always sticks with me, and it always had done. He had to smell that for
oh
hours.
yeah, man,
Oh,
just
can't think of anything
what
worse.
dedication to the craft,
100%.
But speaking of which, so well, let's go ahead and cover your what did you think was scary about the film?
Well, as that scene,
Oh, with
it always,
Rhodes.
yeah, it always
Yeah.
stuck with me, and I couldn't remember years ago where I'd seen it, and then realized it was this film, and it's just the feeling of being torn apart, and it happens multiple times in the film. Multiple people get torn apart from his
Yeah.
eyes, which is quite grim, but this one is just horrifying because his legs are dragging away and he's still talking. He's
Yeah, and
still
he's telling
yelling.
him to choke on him,
Yeah, and
It's
his legs are over
like
there.
to,
It's
to the
wild.
bitter end, he's defiant. Yeah, talking about getting torn apart, some of the other horrific deaths in this film include Rickles himself, who
Yeah.
gets cornered by the zombies, and they start with his eye, and you see his
Oh,
eyeball is coming out. And he is laughing and screaming at the same
it's
time as he
crazy.
dies. Yeah. I like to think that I would go out that way if the zombies caught up with me, just
Yeah.
laughing at the absurdity of it all. And then we've got Steele who shoots himself as he gets cornered. I thought that was a little bit of a cop out. They should have let the zombies
Yeah,
get him. Yeah.
but it's expected of his character.
Yeah. Yeah, because he actually was a coward too. So,
Yeah.
and then we've got the poor guy who gets his head ripped off.
Mm.
That to me was the scariest of the
Yeah.
deaths, because of what they did with the audio. So you hear he's screaming, ah, ah,
Mm.
ah, and then as he's screaming and they're ripping his head off, his vocal cords are stretching. And so he's like, ah, and it's like this
Oh,
horrible realization that you're hearing his vocal cords get stretched off of his neck. And so I was just like, yeah, that is Tom Savini and his most twisted, most
yeah.
sinister. I'm gonna really mess up some people with my craft, and he did, man.
It's
That scene stuck with me for a very long time. So
it's crazy to think that he literally came up with all of the deaths in his basement with a very small amount of people, and it just shows how much of a genius Tom Savini is,
my
and how
God,
he's
yeah.
just a master of what he does.
Yeah, I mean, thinking back to just all of the great work that he's done over the years,
Mm.
from Friday the 13th to Madman to Creep Show, he did several episodes of my favorite horror television show, Tales from the Dark Side.
Yeah.
Um, he directed an episode of that called Halloween Candy with this horrific, huge goblin monster that eats people.
Oh,
It's just he is the master of horror art, of
yep.
horror gore, and really of just horror movie effects in general. I don't think anybody will ever top Savini.
No, definitely not.
Nicotero is trying his damnedest, and he might someday, who knows? But
Maybe.
I think Nicotero, where he's kind of is a little bit lesser than Savini, would be that he tends to rely on CGI.
Yeah.
And so he does a lot of CGI stuff, whereas Savini was all practical all the time, maybe.
Yeah,
Not that
especially
he
in
had a
the
choice.
yeah, especially in the later years of The Walking Dead, you can tell that that's when CGI comes
Right.
into it.
So yeah, Tom Savini and those deaths, man. Um, as far as performances, I would say Laurie Cardeal stole the show for me. She gave
Yeah.
such a nuanced, powerful performance all over
Hmm.
the board. She showed every emotion. There's one scene where she's just sort of I saw the graves. It's a very kind of
Yeah.
understated, when she's talking about how she saw the grave of the previous captain. Um, and that was the other thing about Dr. Frankenstein was like, dude, are you that dumb that you're going to use the bodies of the guys that
Yeah.
are, making it hard for you guys to work? But there's some comedy in this too.
Oh
There's
yeah.
Jarlath Conroy's drinking, of course, is part of it. But then we also have the great scene where the shovel comes down on the zombie's head and pushes it away, and you see his eyes are just kind of looking back and forth now that he's
Yes.
he's only half a head, and it's like that's so very Savini and very creative, but also
Yeah.
hilarious. And Bub, of course, is funny in his own
Yeah.
way.
In his own
Um,
little way.
yeah, do you want to kind of explain to the audience in case they haven't seen this who Bub was and what that character was all about?
Yeah, so Bob was kind of Dr. Frankenstein's test subject, and he was kind of the first zombie who was kind of remembering what it was like to be human, what he could do, like simple things like picking up a phone, speaking words, and the actor himself actually improvised all of it, which is crazy. And
Wow.
he's so warming on the screen, and he is a little bit of comedic release in this very bleak film, but um in the end he gets his own back, he gets his revenge, and it is
Yes.
badass. I love it.
Yeah, so I forget about that sometimes. Part of Captain Rhodes's death, he has been shot by Bub, who he
Yes.
pissed off Bub by refusing to salute him. And
Yeah.
so you see that Bub now has a gun and he's following Rhodes down the hall, and Rhodes is wounded and he's
It's like a
leaving this
Western.
trail of blood, And then he gets to the end of the hall and he sees a route of escape. And he's like, all right, I'm out of here. And he goes to leave. And of course, he's surrounded by zombies. And then Bub, as a final gesture, shoots him in the dick.
Hit him where it hurts.
It's
Oh yeah.
like, wow, what a great ending for Captain Rhodes. Gets shot in the dick, ripped apart, choke on him. So this movie, yeah, while it may not be the greatest zombie movie of all time, it's a lot of fun. It's definitely got its slow moments, where they're
Yeah.
talking about, the nature of the end of the world and the nature of
Yeah.
humanity and things like that. But then you've also got those fantastic deaths, all of the comedy, the comic relief, and just the beautiful, beautiful gore.
Yeah.
So out of 10, I would give Day of the Dead a solid 8. How about yourself?
Probably a 6.
Okay.
Because of that random wrestling scene that made me laugh out loud when they're
Which,
all when they burst out the door and they're
oh
all
yeah, yeah,
fighting.
yeah. That was so
And then she
80s.
goes and
Yeah.
gets drunk. That was
Right.
exactly my thoughts, exactly. And it just made
Right.
me laugh so much.
That was such cheesy 80s
Yeah.
silliness. Yes. Miguel, I have to give it to Miguel for evening the score. It wasn't
Yeah.
looking good for our heroes for a second there, but Miguel comes through at the very end and
Yeah.
very unexpectedly decides, you know what, fuck it. I'm just gonna let the zombies in here and let them do their thing. And he just kind of lays there and lets them eat him, and
Oh.
kisses his cross and says goodbye to the world. And then, yeah, we finally
Yeah.
get that nice zombie vengeance at the end. And then we get our happy ending. So we're going to average it out at a 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
And are there any final thoughts on Day of the Dead before we sign off the scared shit list?
Well, as it was Romero's favorite out of the trilogy. I think it really does like still hold up, and it does relate to the modern day because things aren't so happy outside, and it's still very relatable. And I think everyone should watch it. Watch the whole trilogy.
I agree. Watch the whole trilogy. Watch some of the ones that come out later too. I would say
Yeah.
they're not as good as the original trilogy, but they're still very watchable. And we get more of that sort of smart zombie vibe, that Bub started.
Yes.
Bub started the whole thing with zombies kind of remembering who they are. We get some more of that in Land of the Dead.
Mm.
And then there's a Day of the Dead remake actually that I sat down
I
and watched
know.
today, They have a vegetarian zombie and some more interesting comic relief and things in it. So
Wow.
definitely worth watching just as a distraction if you like zombie movies. But if you like horror movies in general, definitely check out Day of the Dead. I strongly
Yeah.
recommend it for horror fans in general. And that's going to do it for us for this episode of the Scared Shitless podcast.
Really?